Hello and welcome to Managing in the Middle. We are Rajita and Vishal, your hosts for this podcast. Now, here's where we talk about what it takes to be a people manager in this day and age of constant change and challenges, not to mention even the existential question of do we need managers. We share our stories from our own people management experience, our learnings from that experience, and we also have guests who are experts in their own right. They come and they talk to us about their views on people management. And if you tuned into our last few episodes or are joining us for the first time, welcome. And thank you for being part of this journey. Over to you, Vishal, to tell us about what we're going to talk about. What is our topic for today?
So today we're tackling the one tool that can be considered a manager's greatest superpower or their biggest liability. No surprises, communication. Most people call it a soft skill. We're here to tell you that's obviously a mistake. And I think it's probably time we retired soft skill as a terminology. Communication obviously isn't just about being nice. It is a really, really powerful strategic lever for all of us to use, not just managers. It's how you translate executive ambiguity into your team's action. It's how you ensure your own invisible hard work finally gets the recognition it deserves. And communication can also mean a lot more things, which I hope we kind of get to unpack with our guest today, who's built an entire practice around the idea that how you speak, share, and show up determines your impact. Lucero, welcome. Just to quickly introduce you, Lucero is a seasoned business psychologist and a certified leadership coach dedicated to mastering the human side of business. As the co-founder of Pitch Ninjas, she's redefining communication coaching by distilling over 20 years of corporate experience into a transformative methodology. Lucero's expertise was forged during her tenure in people development at Google, where she rose to senior leadership and became a sought-after executive coach for high-growth startups. She's seen firsthand the make it or break it power of executive communication in the business world, and which is why she co-founded Pitch Ninjas to spare others, all of us, the painful learning curve that she's experienced, unlock potential, and create confident communicators ready to seize every opportunity. Lucero, so excited to have you here again. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Vishal. And Raji, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Not at all, Lucero. This has been such a long time coming, right? I remember about a year ago, I think we discussed that Vishal and I are planning to start a podcast. We'd love to have you. And it just took us a long time to get you on the podcast. But thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being a guest here to talk to us about a topic that is not very easy to unpack. I don't think anybody communicates about communication enough. And before we jump right into all the serious stuff and talk about what it takes to be a great communicator as a manager especially, I wanted to ask you a fun question. Vishal and I will share as well, but we want you to go first. So if your communication style were a movie genre, what would it be?
That is a very thought-provoking question. I was thinking about it, and I don't know. The first thing that comes to mind is kind of like indie films. And I say this because it's very much the style of sort of open-ended. I can think about, if I draw a parallel to communication, you think sort of open-ended, like introspective, questioning. These indie films aren't like your mainstream films. There's a lot of sort of interpretation to be had around the style. They're not mainstream, so they're quite particular, and it always it's very thought-provoking as well. And I think communication in a way is that it's sort of the depth of communication. If you were really to think about communication, like you said, Raji, at the start, we communicate, but we don't necessarily think how we communicate all the time. It takes a moment to sort of pause and think, how am I coming across? Do I want to take the time to get feedback from others? But if I get my point across, that's fine, and I'll let them interpret it. So I think it's a little bit of that. There's a lot of thought to be had and a lot of, care to be had when we think about, if we really think about how we communicate and come across.
Yeah.
So I think it's something around that.
Yeah.
A lot of things. like a psychological thriller as well.
I was just thinking indie films are a very niche genre, right? Like it's not a mainstream
They are.
genre as such.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to see if there is a message there about, how many managers probably fall in that category. Vishal, do you want to go next?
The inspiration for, I guess, my movie genre came from Rajata. It's probably where I would naturally tend towards, but she was very articulate in calling it out. So, for those of you who've watched some of our previous episodes, we've made a lot of connections between people management in the movies. And in my case, I think probably the best reference I can kind of go with is Indian movies or Bollywood for those people that, are familiar with it. It's basically big on emotion. Don't exactly leave anything unsaid. Bring the entire room along for the ride. Slightly dramatic, but hopefully unforgettable. That's probably how I'd characterize it.
Can you imagine, Vishal, there is an entire genre for like Bollywood movies?
There is.
Yeah. I don't think that
Absolutely.
pattern exists anywhere else, or maybe it's also talking to the fact that there are so many managers who are also Indian. I'm not sure which one it is.
And so many managers would probably be willing to kind of break into song and dance, Rajata, to get their point across. So yeah,
Oh, yeah,
Could be.
that's nice.
Could
Yeah.
be.
that could make things a little more fun.
That's another form of communication.
Yeah. So I was thinking about this question as well, and I was thinking, okay, I may want it to be a genre, but my team will probably have a completely different understanding of what my genre is. I would like to think that the movie genre that aligns with my communication style is more romantic comedy, like rom-coms, where there is a lot of humor that is used to land serious points. It makes hard conversations feel less hard. It leaves people feeling good, even with bad news. But maybe my team sometimes perceives that to be more of like a thriller, more strategic and precise. Every word is really deliberate. And while it sounds like it's very scary, I think, for me, thrillers are really great at reading rooms and
Yeah.
knowing exactly when to drop a punchline or a bombshell.
Yeah.
So maybe that's what the team may perceive it as, but I think I'm like at a good middle there. Like I do use a lot of humor in my communication, but I also am more sensitive to reading the room kind of thing.
I was like indie film thriller. Yeah, but there's a lot that comes in it, right? I think it's hard to just
Yeah.
because like I was saying to Vishal, I speak from the heart, but then I do contain it depending on who I'm talking to, or if I'm pitching, I do like to be very relational type of communication, but it sort of switches. So there's like, if I think about it, there's lots of different genres there, but it depends on the situation, the audience, the conversation. Then you think personal and professional.
Yeah. That's a very nice point, right? Like, the ability to be able to flex your style based on who you're talking to and what you're going to be communicating and the setting in which you are. So I think absolutely that's a great point.
But on a lighter note, Raji, I'm sure everyone wishes that communication ended like most rom-coms. You're happy at the end of the day, and that's what matters, right?
Absolutely.
Yes, giving people hope.
Exactly.
That's what we need, right?
That's what
why
we need.
watch these rom-coms or these comedies.
Yeah,
course.
it's especially when the world is around you is all chaotic. I think rom-coms are just the dose that you need. So, anyway, we're talking a lot more about movies than communication. But coming back to the reason we wanted to have you as a guest and as an expert here, Lucero. We hear that communication is, like Vishal said, it's a soft skill or it's a nice to have for managers. But you've built an entire practice around it, which means that there is a need to get better at it, right? And one, I wanted to understand, when you do talk to organizations, how do you make the case for why communication is actually a strategic lever? What do managers lose when they treat it as something that's good to have or nice to have, but not necessary to have?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that comes to us or is asked a lot when we're pitching to clients and selling our services. A lot of them is like, we have communication training, but it's not top of the agenda. But you get them to really, again, back to my point, to really get them to think about, okay, if you think about your leaders, your managers, or your individual contributors, what is the biggest what are you seeing as a gap when it comes to their communication? Or what are the things that are coming across? You think about sellers, you think about those that are in support functions, managers, as we're in this topic of management, right? And yes, you think, it's a nice to have, but what happens, and this is where we really sort of, I don't want to say we enlighten, but we really sort of tell the story of how we worked in our past clients. And what happens when it's a nice to have is, decisions slow down. There's ambiguity, I won't say across the board, but when there's misalignment, well, what happens? You're not sort of rowing the boat, or your team is not rowing the boat in the same direction. Your team starts looking elsewhere for options if things are not clear to them. If management or managers aren't being clear in terms of the direction. I mean, you think about even from a values or a mission perspective, where is that? How is that articulated? Is that top down? Do you have your own as a manager framework around that? And so we then treat it as a business case. It's not, and I love, Rochelle, how you said it earlier, like it's not a soft skill, right? Communication is strategy. Unclear communication, we know where that can go. Missed deadlines. The bottom line, it's affected at the end of the day. If you think about revenue, if you think about disengaged teams, right? If you think about attrition, like I just mentioned, and then if you think big picture, well, if there's shareholder value, what happens there at the top? And so then it becomes a strategy, right? Then communication is a strategy. And so we really then hone in on, if your managers don't have this skill, or they have the skill, but they haven't really kind of looked under the hood, how they communicate, gotten feedback from their teams, then, this is what's going to happen, right? And so we go through that sort of list. And so then they start to see, oh, it's not a sort of a nice to have, it's actually honing the skill and helping them become the leaders that they should be and investing in them. And so we then switch the mindset. I get this a lot. Is it remedial coaching? I don't want to position manager communication skills coaching as a remedial. How can I position it as something of value? How can I position it so that they don't think, oh, I need to do this because? So we sort of go through that angle. And it kind of clicks at the end. They're like, oh, this is really important. And if we think of management, if we think of middle managers, and if we equip them with the skill, okay, then we can start to see and we can track, right? We talk a lot about ROI and how you can track something like communication coaching. When they go into their next meeting, when they talk to their boss from, top to bottom, how can you track that there's been some sort of shift in the way they come across? Do their team see it? Do their managers see it? Their bosses see it? And so you can see that shift when it is applied appropriately.
Yeah, as you were saying this, I was just thinking that what you're also saying is it's not the responsibility of just the manager to be able to change. Like there is an entire feedback loop that works. The feedback from the team is important. The feedback from your manager is important. And do you find that organizations use coaching or training as like a fixing, like you said, it's not remedial, but do they use that as the only lever to fix things on communication, or is there other setups that people also have in place? Like, an organization supporting their managers to become better?
Yeah, I mean, the most typical setup that we hear, right, is we have workshops, or we have a facilitator that we use, so a sort of a one-woman show or a one-man show. And they come and we contract with them, and they come when we need them, right? So it's always like when we hear something is not going according to plan, they bring them in. Whereas we try to, turn that on its head and go, it's not when you hear something happens and you bring someone in or you train them because they got this feedback or it's coming up on this survey. How can we kind of nip that in the bud and start really early? Communication is everything. We say, like, you're communicating on a constant basis. It's not, again, a nice to have. And if you think about investing in that skill set, it's almost like the world is your oyster, no matter what this person goes on to do, no matter what role they have.
Right.
Be able to communicate your ideas. If it's a decision that you need to make, if it's a nice chit chat or a knowledge sharing, or you're pitching for a big deal, you have to convince your boss, or you're having a difficult conversation with your team member, it's a performance review. I mean, I can go on and on and on and on, right? When we all know. Communication is like the baseline for everything that you do. Don't think about it again as remedial. I need to tackle this because someone got bad feedback. Okay, yes, that's fine. But if you think about it as a holistic approach, I mean, just imagine what your organization can be at the end of the day, the narrative, how they speak, even how top management speaks as well.
So it's more of a hygiene than like a symptom of something completely failing, right? In fact, that has again prompted another question, which is, for the managers listening, what might be some signs or some indication that they can on lean onto a coach for support? Why might I want to go? Because I might think that it's all going fine. It's up to the listener to figure out what I'm saying. I've said my bit. So yeah. What might prompt me, or what can be some signals? And just try to think of like what can motivate me to want to get better.
I mean, I think there are several signals, from the obvious signal of, sometimes we get like, oh, I have to do an engagement or a high stakes conversation / speaking event, and that is a no-brainer. Let's engage, speak. But I think the less obvious are just you thinking about communication as an investment, right? As a lever, as I always say it, and we say it all the time at Pitch Ninjas, is it's a muscle. And if you think about a muscle, if you work out, if you train, I mean, I weight train, and it's not like I have enormous muscles, but I've been weight training for 5 years, and I go steady, but I know I'm never going to become, unless I take steroids, a huge person. But I constantly see little shifts, right? And if I stop training, I can see what happens. And if I continue training at the level I'm training, then I see those gains. And so we always use this metaphor, like communication is a muscle that you constantly have to train. And we always say, like, think about the speakers that you admire, or the orators, leaders, politicians, you name it. Who do you admire? It could even be a CEO of your company, or your boss even, or your colleague. What do you admire about that? And a lot of times, it kind of plants a seed in someone's head to say, oh, I don't want to be like that, but I like the way they express themselves. They're charismatic, or they hold the room really well. They don't ramble. They don't go off on tangents. They're asked a question, they answer it. Or they're not these monologue speakers that, you've been in meetings and they don't stop talking. And so you sort of pick at those people, and then you go, oh, I want to enhance that, or I want to build that, or I want to become that. And I know that takes self-awareness. At the end of the day, right, that's a bit of self-awareness. It's not like every manager is going to go communication. But I think there's a culture issue there with companies as well. It's a culture issue. It's an investment in your skills. How do we give people something that's rewarding? We have clients that think about their own development. We've had managers come to us and say, I want to work on this. I want to invest in myself. It's kind of putting the oxygen mask first.
Yes.
And I want to get better. I'm already a good speaker. We had this recently. I feel I'm a great communicator, but I want to get better. So I want to try this. And then if it goes well, I want to give it to my team. So we were kind of unpacking that. Well, what happened there? I want to speak more publicly, and I just want to enhance that skill. We don't have anything internally necessarily that's this one-on-one approach. Like, yes, there's workshops, but they're not necessarily catered to the level or a certain tenure, or, to get a human by your side. And that wasn't necessarily available.
I think, then feedback is good to get, but till you see the need for yourself, right? Like to want to invest in yourself, that self-awareness part that you were talking of. Mm-hmm. And I think until that happens, you're probably not going to invest in wanting to be a better communicator. And you said something about the cultural effects, and I was just thinking of global workplaces. Like almost every organization either works globally with there are other teams across the world, or has a mixed culture in the workplace, even if they're located in one geography. And that, to me itself, is a reason for a manager to learn how to communicate well, because you're talking to different people from different backgrounds, and how do you get your point across? Yeah. Whether it's your senior leadership or your own team. Mm-hmm. So to me, that itself is a good impetus for wanting to invest in your own communication skills.
And then you bring up a great point, because then you make me think of, if you think of a manager and their direct reports, how different everyone is, right? I remember when I was managing, I had someone who, wanted, in a way, I had to sort of think about my communication. I speak very directly, and I'm very direct, but then I realized I had to soften my approach a bit. Not that it was painful or awkward for me, but in terms of delivering difficult messages, compared to maybe somebody else on my team who was like, just give it to me very straight. I don't need you to sugarcoat it. I was like, great, kind of my style. And not to say that it was easier, but you get somebody else who's a bit more sensitive adapting that. And I think it goes back to the point of adapting for the audience and knowing how to do that. I mean, that is a fundamental skill of communication. I always say when we talk to clients, to be able to adapt and read the room. And, and you can do this over video, but of course you can do it even better in life, when you're in real life. But to be able to signal, like, what are they smiling? Are they looking down? Are they on their multiple tabs? Are they on their phone? Am I getting across the message? I mean, those are signals that then you go, is this landing?
Yeah.
Oh, it's going for you, and you pause, and they might say, you know what, I'm feeling really uncomfortable right now. Or, you know, they get quite emotional and we say, let's take a break. Okay, that's fine. Maybe we'll reconvene later, or, you know, things like that. I think you're bringing up a great point around your team members, who they are. And I'm not saying, you know, thinking a personality test, but you can start to see how they are, who they are, how they want to be communicated with verbally, over email. And that, I think, is a great management skill to have, to be able to communicate or adapt.
Yeah, and it's also taking away from the fact that you need to just communicate an idea in a presentation or a meeting. It's, like you said, back to not the basics, but what you do day to day. How do you communicate on a daily basis and make that easy and thoughtful, rather than, oh, I have this big presentation to make, which is also important, but the day to day is important as well.
Yeah.
Very, very important. Vishal, I can see a question there.
Yeah, no, I have a few questions, but Lucero, I mean, we obviously kind of started with establishing the why of communication. I think, you know, in the conversation that we've had in the last couple of minutes, for anyone who wasn't already clear about the fact that it's hygiene, I think we've established that. You know, with the piece around adapting your communication to your audience, I was thinking a little more about the how. I think we all kind of agree that communication is about the receiver, right? It's not about the sender. What you did kind of touch upon was you kind of tailor communication to meet the needs of whoever is receiving it. But I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on any sort of first principles that you would kind of share when it comes to communication, particularly when we're talking about, you know, more than one person, right? Because everyone's needs are very, very different. And if you are kind of talking to a broader audience, let's say your collective team together or a group of 50 people, what in your opinion is maybe some first principles or what you would consider is good communication?
When you're talking to a big group.
I mean, a group that's more than one, because, I mean, I think with one, you can probably tailor a little bit to meet their need, but if it's larger audiences, how do you bring the how to life?
One of the things I heard, and I think it's a fantastic tip, and I heard it from a talk I went to, and I've been talking to this gentleman, his name is Terry Zuplat. He was Obama's speechwriter during his tenure. And, you know, I think I remember the number 3,477. I mean, don't quote me. Speeches that Obama did throughout his tenure. Terry wrote, I think, 500 of them.
Oh, wow.
And we've been speaking because, you know, we're trying to get him on to do something with Pitch Ninja. So we've been talking for a bit. And he said something really interesting that we sort of had picked up on when we're coaching our clients. But I think he said it in a really interesting way. And it's kind of the penny dropped for us and our coaches, and I'm going to share it. So drum roll for your audience. When you are speaking to an audience of more than one, but a big audience, right, is craft your speech or your communication to one person. Think about
Interesting.
I know, right? And then script your speech for that individual. And don't think about like, oh, senior, junior, celebrity, non-celebrity. Just pick someone who you think know, or maybe you do know someone who's going to be in the audience, a friend, a colleague, someone. Great. If Raj is going to be in the audience and I'm going to do a big speech, I'm going to think about Raji and I'm going to communicate my speech, my script to her. And it'll land, no matter who you are, it will land. And that is simple. And that for me was like, wow. Such an easy way to think about it, rather than getting yourself convoluted, stressed. What am I going to say? And that, I'm like, that I'm stealing, and our coaches know, and we were kind of thinking about that, but the way he said it, that's gold.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, it's simple, it's profound, and I think it also kind of talks to two things that are essential to communication and also kind of forms the basis of one of the other questions we had, which is the confidence piece and the authenticity piece, right? You want to be authentic enough that it would land across different audiences, and you want to be comfortable enough that it is going to land. So that definitely kind of resonates.
Yeah. So
Like Vishal
Absolutely.
said, it's like so simple. The approach is so simple that you're not thinking of like 10,000 people. Like even on a podcast, like sometimes we don't know who we're talking to, but it's a conversation that the three of us are having. Okay,
Yeah.
if it's a very good framework to use in any kind of
Yeah.
communication.
It is. Yeah, I think we often say if we enjoyed the conversation, hopefully the audience will, and I think this kind of translates in quite the same way.
And I
It
guess
does.
the other thing to think about as well is you are not going to please every single individual.
You aren't. Yeah.
You won't.
Correct.
True.
No matter if you're like an Obama or a fantastic, whoever you are, you will. And not everyone is going to go out raving about you, 5-star reviews, and you're just going to become this. And so knowing that in advance and being okay with that, and think, it's not about people pleasing. It's about the message, and what do I want to convey. So it's all it's about them. What am I going to give them? It's not about me and my ego and did I get a 5 out of 5. It's what am I going to leave them with, if anything, that they go back and go, oh, that one thing Lucero said about it's like one person in the audience. Oh, that's exactly what I needed to hear. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Everything else she was saying was all mumble jumble. No, I'm kidding. It's almost like now I got something interesting.
No, it's definitely communication code to live by going forward.
Right.
I think that's the key message of the podcast, and we can end here right now. I'm just joking.
Exactly. Let's call it. We're done.
Yeah, Raji, it's like half an hour and we got it all covered. Nice, be succinct, be personable, and you've got
Exactly. No, but just staying on this thought, Lucero, we're obviously kind of operating in what is a really, really warped world at this point in time, particularly in the corporate sector. And I think that's been established time and again. I think middle managers are in an interesting position where, I mean, particularly if you kind of think about, whether it's organizational goals or state of the union. I mean, obviously restructuring is kind of rife across many industries at this point. And so they're sitting with information they potentially cannot share with their teams. And going back to this whole conversation on how do you kind of keep it authentic, how do you keep it tailored for one such that it reaches many, what are your thoughts on how we can actually get managers to communicate with authenticity as well as confidence when, one, they genuinely don't have all the answers, or they aren't necessarily allowed to share the extent of information that they've probably been made privy to?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I always sort of think middle management, right? It's like a human pressure valve, right? They've got like information coming from above, and I always like to say information from above, pressure from below. My laptop's going crazy. Pressure from below. And so I think managers, like, the instinct is to have to know everything, otherwise your credibility will be destroyed. And so they kind of take that in. Team doesn't have certainty from you, then what, right? They need that orientation, or they need that North Star, that direction. And so I come back to this. It's, if it's being sort of genuine, and if you don't have the information, I mean, simple as this, I can't share the full picture yet. Here's what I know, and here's what we're going to focus on right now. And that's not a weak answer, I don't know answer. It's an honest one, and your team will love you for that. You deliver it with honesty, with calm, and with genuineness, right? Because when that trust isn't there, or you stay quiet, or I mean, all of us probably have had this happen, right? It's just like, I don't know. And then the team scrambles, and then of course the team members speak and they speculate, and you're absent in the room. You don't show up, you don't say what you can. Then they start to make stories in their head, and then it's all doom gloom. And then what happens? Demotivation, this, that, and the other, where in fact you had a bit of information, or you had lack of. And all you need to say is, this is what I know, this is what I don't know. I'm here, I'm trying my hardest, I'm trying to get as much information. When I do have something, I'll convey it. But what we have right now is this, what we don't have right now is that. So name what you can't, and then keep moving. I think that's fundamentally to maintain your authenticity and the genuineness when it comes to these things.
Again, it's such a simple thought, right? You just verbalize what you do know, verbalize what you don't. And I think it's just, maybe this pressure of, needing to have all the answers, which sometimes I feel is self-inflicted more than probably what your team expects, that probably drives you to communicate in a certain way. And this is such a better, I guess, take on how to kind of get the message across, because the reality is you can't communicate if you don't have the information, right?
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah.
And I mean, it's easier said than done. Just be honest. And that honesty is very tricky, I think, for some people is because I remember this a lot, like to be honest, to not have the information, to be honest that I'm not getting it from my bosses, right? They won't give me the information. Like, how honest is honest? Or how much do I sort of, cut the noise or not sort of get the noise to go through? They say that always as for managers. You're there to sort of bottle up the noise so that your team doesn't start to stress out and speculate. So they're in a very tricky position. So that's why I say it's like this human pressure valve to be in this position. But again, leading with honesty and speaking truthfully and with honesty and just genuinely, I mean, it's going to get you farther than playing fights.
Yeah, it also, it kind of promotes a lot more trust that your team will have with you and say, okay, my managers told me that they don't know and they know but they can't share. So either ways, they're telling me things as is rather than filtering and hiding a lot more.
I think also most teams these days can see through you when you're trying to kind of window dress something, right? That probably you should call out in the most honest way to kind of begin with. I think it also kind of comes from the place where, your fundamental belief is we're all adults and we're all in a position where we can process this information. So yeah, I definitely tend to kind of lean into the honesty piece of it.
Yeah, I mean, what are they going to say? I don't think they're going to say anything to the contrary. Like, oh, wow, okay. He or she's, it's honest. Great.
Yeah.
I don't feel they're trying to hide anything, right? I don't think you can go wrong.
Yeah, I think, Lucero, it becomes harder for a manager when there is bad news than when there is good news. Right, it becomes much harder when I know that this is going to impact my team, especially, in today's climate in the last couple of years, things where we've had rifts and all of that. I think it's become harder for managers to not hold information, but also they've also been kept in the dark a lot of times, right?
Yeah.
And it's more or less always has been bad news that they have to share, or they find out that they have to share at the last minute when they didn't know anything till the nth hour. So I think it becomes more difficult, and it's a lot more emotionally draining, that kind of communication, I feel.
I mean, if you think of us as humans delivering bad news, it's like, I don't think no one takes pleasure delivering a difficult piece of news, right? Or bad news. But if you do it, and I always come back to this, I used to say a lot from a management perspective, if you've become a manager, like you've got to have some sort of care. You've got to want to care for your people in some way, shape, form. And I'm not saying coddling, and cuddling. There has to be an element, some slight, of care, of how you, deliver more of these difficult conversations, messages from you're being let go, or you got to find another job, or you're not going to get this rating, things that are, or you're not going to get promoted. There's these messages that are a reality in a corporate environment or at work, and to be able to deliver that again, in your style, but with like an element of care, because this is a human receiving difficult information. If you want to be a manager, you've got to care about people. What do you mean care? No, I really suggest, you care a little bit about, their emotional, like, you don't have to be a therapist, but there is emotion. There will be emotions in individuals, especially with difficult news. Fact. You might have someone crying in front of you, but you might have someone silent, and then you need to digest, leave, and come back.
This reminds me of, a term that I think one of my former managers kind of coined, and it was just around the time where Kim Scott's radical candor was quite a thing. I'm sure the both of you might remember it, because obviously it kind of started, at Google while she was there. She actually called it compassionate candor instead of radical candor.
Right.
And so the idea was, can you be honest and get the message across, but with the right dose of care, to your point, Lucero.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah, and I think, compassion for me trumps empathy, because sometimes I can't empathize with you being let go.
Exactly.
Because I am not.
Yeah.
But can I have compassion for your situation, for what you're going through, to understand what you're going through? I think that
Yes.
to me is more important.
Yes.
And it's such a tough job, right? Like, to be able to balance business decisions, which are taken very clinically, like in the sense it's data, it's what we need to do, and the people, the human side of business, which is, okay, these are people, they're not resources, they're not headcounts, they have feelings, they have situations in
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
And then sometimes I remember when we started having risks at Google, I think one of the first things that I had to learn as a manager was to be able to communicate to the people who were left behind, who didn't get laid off, to say, okay, what is going on? Like, as their manager, you're going through a period of shock yourself. But second, you're like, okay, I also need to take care of these people because they're looking for answers, and the only person that they can ask right now is me.
Yeah.
I think managers have been through a lot more tough situations than they've ever been through in their lives. Yeah, in the past, I think 25 years of being a manager in the last 5 years taught me a whole lot that I never learned in the 20 years. So.
I mean, I think it's one of the most difficult jobs, right?
It is,
and the
yeah.
one that's
It is.
often overlooked when you think about, I'm a manager, it's unless you're at the top and you're a leader, it's a very difficult role, because there's an element of, am I an individual contributor? Well, some of them are still, but they're managing a team.
Yeah.
We can get into all sorts of things, but it's a difficult role, and I don't think one that's talked about a lot. So thanks to your podcast, bringing more awareness to all these, things. Like, there's not a lot of resources or even training, or, we all constantly, our managers don't get much. What should we give them?
Yeah.
That was a brilliant plug, Lucero. Thank you for that.
Great
Well, it's
communication.
true. I mean, Roger, I'm like, you guys are doing something great, because I hear it with clients a lot, but this is interesting what you're offering, and it's somehow a forgotten topic in a way. It's always sort of leaders up there, what they
Yep.
need, and then it's like the juniors coming in, if even, but there's always focus on leader. I mean, when we pitch, it's like, what do you have for leaders as execs? Oh, well, we're trying to kind of bust that model, because execs have their coach. We know that. We don't, but we're happy to, but that's not our business model. We're trying to disrupt that model and bring it to the bottom. So it's always like it's a known across the learning and development industry. It's just leadership is where they go, right?
Yeah, that's such a great positioning for, what's happening around us today. I mean, Vishal and I have been reading news, and you probably also read that,
Yeah.
right, Lucero, about how a lot of middle managers are being axed from companies, and they're changing the ratio of manager routines. And having managed both large and small teams, and also running the podcast, I mean, one of the reasons we started the podcast was because middle managers play such a large role in cementing teams across different levels, and or especially between senior leadership and the front line. And I kind of feel that there is a role that needs to be valued differently. Maybe it's not just the work, like it's what a manager brings to the table, which is the human side that we're just talking about. Like, it's not making a presentation, but it is communicating with care, right?
Yeah.
So how do you do that? And I don't know. I want to unpack that a little bit, maybe not today with you, but generally I definitely do want to think about what is the thought behind not having managers. I remember being a manager to 35 people one time. It was a nightmare. I mean, I probably thought I need to go in for some kind of counseling and psychological support after that, because it's very hard to be able to be everything to 35 people.
Well, yeah. I mean, I was
As a
going to say,
manager.
and then you spend your
Yeah.
time. I mean, you spend your days managing, right? It's like
Yes.
and
Yeah.
what are they delivering, and are they doing what they're supposed to, and then you're
Correct.
reporting to your boss, and so your days are spent with the 35 people, unless again there is no sort of acknowledgement or necessarily interest care that you just become an IC and you need to please the top, and then
Yeah.
you're like,
Yeah,
what is
yeah,
my
yeah.
to make me look good so that I can look good, and that's therefore I look good, and then I'll
Yeah,
get them. There's
yeah.
that type of management.
Yeah, and I think that is that's what I was thinking about. Like, is it hard for managers to articulate what they do? Is that why middle management is not getting its due? I mean, Lucero, you and I have been managers together, and we were managing teams which did not have tangible results like sales quotas and numbers to talk for, because we were talking about people's development.
Yeah.
And It's very hard to articulate what you are doing as an IC because you're probably not even an IC at that point. You're managing your entire team, and your team gets a lot of the credit for the output, right?
Yeah.
But you become an enabler.
Yeah.
I feel that it becomes harder for managers to say, okay, so what was I actually doing here?
Yeah.
I remember asking myself this question, and I said, okay, maybe I was coaching, maybe I was doing this, but I feel, I don't know if you get a lot of managers asking you that question in your practice, but if there was some tip or an advice that you'd like to give to all managers on how do you learn to communicate your own impact, like, are we missing something there? And like you said, it seems like an either or, like either I manage my team or I just do self promotion. Is there a good middle ground which is healthy for everyone?
I mean, there should be. I mean, I think, like we're saying, like the middle managers, right? They're sort of the infrastructure, right, of a functioning or dysfunctioning team, right? I feel like this infrastructure, like people or their bosses, people only notice it when it breaks, right?
Yeah.
And managers really sort of get picked on if something bad or something isn't
Absolutely.
necessarily happening the way it's supposed to. And so, I mean, I think about this sort of self-promotion as yes, your job is in a way to translate what your team does in terms of the business and the impact of what they care about. But, it's kind of, I always tell managers, like, make notes, like keep a record. It's not like a bragging file or sort of this, I need to make a note of what I did because they're going to ask me. But it's almost like, what decisions did you influence, right, on the team? What conflicts did you resolve before they even escalated? Or what hires have you done? Have you brought on the team? But like more importantly, like which hires have you developed? Which ones have you've developed so that they go on to do something else? Maybe not on the team, but they went on and did X, or they got promoted, right, with your help. And so thinking about those moments, and so when the time comes to sort of review or look at what you've done, you've got that in your pocket. And you can say, like, we delivered this because I restructured the team, or, we communicated across functions. My team member did this because I removed these bottlenecks. And so you're not necessarily bragging, or you're not necessarily, it's cringe in a way, like they say, but it's articulating your impact, right? And articulating it because it deserves to be articulated and it deserves to be looked at. And it's not necessarily, it shouldn't necessarily feel like self-promotion. It's your job, but you're bringing light into that. You're just highlighting the fact that because of you, these things have happened. And a lot of times that is unseen and not spoken about. And so therefore it's just quiet. And so when it comes to then the ask of like, what have you done? Are you an IC? Oh, well, actually I enable these things. And I'm proud of it, and my output or the team gets credit, but a lot of it is what I've done, what I've enabled to do.
And something that kind of strikes me about this question and this debate, Lucero, and I don't know if you have a point of view on it, but people management is the job, right? I think what we're obviously using as mechanisms to measure the efficacy of a people manager is usually not about people management. Like, I think most organizations have still not cracked how do you go about measuring the people management aspect, which one can argue is about 80% of the job, or should be at least 80% of the job. Unless, for example, you have a situation where this particular manager is a complete train wreck, and then you have the entire team up in arms when the person's not doing well, but you don't necessarily have any signals in the system outside of potentially maybe a biannual survey which tells you this person's actually doing well. So sometimes we want them to manage a team of people, but obviously the design is not optimized for the role that they are in. It's still optimized for an individual contributor. It's always an interesting debate, but would love to kind of get thoughts on that.
So I feel like, again, it's a cultural issue, right? So, what is the culture of the organization? How do they view management? What's the role of a manager in the organization? How does the top, right, leadership view it? It's a big role, and are they rewarded accordingly? What metrics are they rewarded on, and so forth and so on, right? Google, management or managers were, they were heavily scrutinized, right? I remember when I was asked to be a manager, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be heavily scrutinized from an HR perspective. If there's one person that gives me bad feedback, I'm going to be called in and asked why. And so, say good or bad. In a way, I suppose it was a good thing to be on top of your game and to care and make sure that people are okay, because being a bad manager had its repercussions, right? But I don't think every company is like that. For me, a lot has to do with the culture of how management is viewed. Is it top of the agenda, or is it just something like back to our nice to have point? We needed them there because that boss can't handle managing 35 people, right? So they put in a layer and they bring somebody in to be able to babysit, in a way, the people that the leader maybe doesn't want to deal with. That's a different way of looking at management.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. Oh, boy.
Yeah.
You had a thought, Raji?
Yeah.
No. There's just so many thoughts that I was
Yeah.
thinking, okay, so one way to articulate my impact as a manager would be to ask the question, how would things land if I was not involved or I was not here? Like if I removed myself from this equation, how would my team show up? And what would their impact be? Like basically, am I a catalyst or am I a deterrent? Like, am I adding value or not? I think it's a question that requires a very honest answer. It requires honesty from
does.
them.
Yeah.
Lucero, you just said it depends on how organizations value their managers.
Yeah.
And going back to the existential crisis that I was just talking about, I kind of feel that for a lot of organizations, middle managers they are much larger in number, right? Like they're literally in the middle of the pyramid, where you have a lot more numbers. So maybe it's a question of economics, why we're targeting middle managers and say we probably need less right now. And we've done an episode on AI and people management, and we realized that you need managers. Like AI cannot replace a manager. The work that a manager does, it can probably replace tasks, it can make life easier, but it cannot replace a manager, right? So that's why I said, in my head, I'm still unpacking that whole thing about why do people think a manager is not required? I mean, I remember, I think Larry Page had said that very famously when Google was at a very, very young company 25 to 30 years ago, saying that I don't think we need managers, only to be proven wrong, if I can say that. Right? Like, you need managers to lead a team, you need managers to communicate, you need managers to be harbingers of culture. So what are we missing? And we, then Vishal and I were jokingly thinking, gosh, if they take away middle managers, then what would we do with this podcast? It's all about middle managers.
I mean, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, unless, of course, AI can replicate. But to your point, it's going to happen. I mean, managers are here to stay for a while.
Yeah.
I think it fundamentally just goes back to, I think even the elimination of manager layers just goes back to us not being able to articulate the value, right? I mean, whether it's at an individual level or whether it's at an organizational level, because I mean, like, to the point you were kind of making, Raji, and Lucero also kind of, highlighted the piece around culture. I mean, organizational culture is a really, really large construct. And I think somewhere for me, even the manager's manager, what sort of value proposition do they see this particular individual bringing to the table has such a profound impact on being able to articulate the impact of that particular individual. Because if you are reporting to someone who fundamentally doesn't believe that you as a factor of this role adds value, you've lost the battle even before you've begun.
Right.
It's a tough spot to be in.
It makes me think it's almost like if there's a way, like if you're in an organization, in a way, if you're getting promoted into management, like having these, I'm not going to say it's a difficult conversation, but having an open conversation.
Exactly.
You want me to be a manager? What does this role entail? How is this role looked at on by you and your management and the management? What is required of this role to be successful? To your point, like Raji, if I don't do this role, or if there's no manager, what happens? What could be from the previous manager? Is there anything that can be done differently, to make this a success? How many managers do we need? How many managers do we have? What's the training development involved? What can I do in my sort of, what can I be equipped with that I can do budget-wise? Like, what's in my control? What's outside of my control? Was asking all these questions, or some of these questions, lay all the cards out on the table. And hopefully, but again, this is me wishful thinking, that the manager gives answers. Wishful thinking, hopefully, right? Not in Michael, I don't know, just do it. It's promotion, you'll get more money. You want it or not? A lot of times they're kind of, handcuffed to go, sure, okay, I'll do it because it's promo and more money incentive, therefore I'll do it. But then there's no backing, necessary training, all this stuff that goes into it, right? Of what makes a great manager. And then you get into all of these things that we're kind of alluding to during this talk, right? Get into it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. Start small, start within your hopefully immediate locus of control with your manager and gauge expectations, see what it means to show up as contributing to the organization, and then go from there.
Yeah.
Easier said than done, though.
And that goes back to your communication and being able to sort of communicate, having the confidence and the influence to be able to sort of stand your ground and go, I want to take this role and I want to understand these parameters are there for me, or the support will be there, or whatever it may be, so that it's clear for me, kind of owning your voice.
Yeah.
Be able to go there, this is what I've been thinking about. And, that holds merit. And me as your manager, I'd be, oh, interesting. You really do care. Let's work at it.
Yeah. And this very nicely kind of goes back to, I think, where we started, Lucero. One of the points you mentioned was around wearing your own oxygen mask when it kind of comes to communication. And we also kind of spoke about managers typically, or leaders approaching pitch ninjas when they think they want to kind of build communication as a skill to grow into. And I mean, I think the reality that we all have probably experienced ourselves, and it's no surprise to anyone, is typically most managers are so busy just, nurturing careers of their teams that they don't necessarily invest in their own development, and that kind of falls off the list. So, when thinking about communication as a skill, what does investing in yourself as a manager actually look like in practice?
Thinking about your development as a non-negotiable. It's not thinking about development when things calm down, when things are quiet, when you're told to. It shouldn't be that way, right? It's just kind of, again, putting that oxygen mask first. And communication is usually, and I don't say it's just because I have, the company. It's a good place to start, right? It's one of those sort of first places to start when you think about development. And I say this because communication, if you invest in it, it then multiplies everything, right? There's a 10x effect with communication, because if you think about your own communication, expressing yourself clearly, making sure that you're understood, that you influence perhaps more top to bottom, it's a great thing to do. And, this can take multiple forms, right? Yes, we have a company that coaches and helps you. Fantastic. There are, like we know, multiple courses, but it just depends. And I want to err you on the side of caution with that, of going somewhere where or you've heard, or your company might have something there. It's also maybe having an honest conversation with a peer of how you show up. Like we did this a lot. I remember, you do something, you present, and then I ask a colleague, just make some notes. I trust you. I'm going to come out. How did I do? What could I have done better? If I was facilitating, someone that I trust, just observe me for a second. What do you think, right? Of course, there's then that, what we do a lot is like recordings and bringing that to the table. So if you are brave enough to sort of record yourself speaking, looking at that, it's an excellent way. We hate seeing ourselves on camera, right? Or most of us. And so that's a fantastic way to even start small. And again, as a manager, something quite simple to do is asking your team, what is something, or what one thing could I have done differently? What do you need to see more of or less of in that sense? And so this is why I say, like, it's quite simple to think about communication as an investment. I mean, there's all these other things, of course, to think about, but I think it's just the fundamental underlying, right, of everything that we do. Yeah. And if you invest in that, then the world is your oyster, as we say. But that's just me being a little bit biased.
No, I think on a lighter note, we should probably get you to review this podcast once we're done recording it and give us feedback on our communication style.
I know.
If you're up for it.
We have been getting like, can you help with podcasts? Of course we can.
Oh, that's great to hear.
We can do it. Yes. Yeah. How you come across. Yeah, for sure.
You could use us as your, test subjects.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I have to say there's great rapport and everything. So yeah, you guys do great.
But Lucero, you were saying something, and I was just thinking about this. Earlier you spoke about how if you're being offered a manager role, you need to have conversations with your manager asking for what do you expect from the role, articulate that clearly. And then just now you also said that, ask your managers for feedback. And I think we don't do that enough, which is asking our managers for more for our own development. Either we think of it as a sign of weakness sometimes, like, oh my God, if I ask my manager for help or feedback, maybe they think I'm not good enough. So I think managers should demand more from their managers as well.
Yeah.
That's the way to grow, or to even get any kind of feedback. Otherwise, how long are you going to depend on the downstream, which is like your team, to tell you where you need to improve, which is one aspect. But even to be able to articulate your value or to do better and grow, and we're talking strategic communication, right?
Yeah.
You also need to ask your manager a lot more, and your managers should be invested in your own growth. Demand
Raji,
more.
I would take that one step forward. I'd say ask your team, ask your manager, ask your peers if you have any trusted confidence. I mean,
Yes.
Power of
yes,
community.
Absolutely. Yeah, 360. Absolutely.
360, exactly.
So, Lucero, there's just such a lot that we spoke about, and I wanted to ask you, is there something that we are not asking or touching upon? And maybe we'll put it in a more fun way to say that if there was one message that you could put on the billboard for a manager struggling with communication, what would it say? It could be a billboard with lots of points, so, don't worry.
Well, I'm actually going very simple. My whole ethos is the simpler the better. So I would say less, mean more.
Ooh.
Say less, period, mean more, period. I kind of position it that way.
It's perfect
Wow.
for a billboard and as a message.
Yeah.
Yeah, keep it simple. Yeah, that's a great one.
Keep it simple, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll create a billboard with that and make sure that we have your picture next to it.
Simple. Right, great. Tell me.
Yeah. Anything else, Vishal? Any last thoughts? And Lucero, from you as well, anything else?
I know, Lucero, anything from you?
No, I mean, this has been great. I think for managers, right, your audience hearing this is really sort of, if you can, have that moment of self-awareness, of just pause and think about your own self-development, your communication. It's a great way to just start. And as we're talking about communication, right, because developing can take many angles, but just a moment, right, to pause how you come across, as Vishal said, it's, from your peers, your bosses, your direct reports, friends even. Let's, if you take it outside the professional world to the personal world, and your communication there is also a reflection, right, of how you come across. So I think it's a great exercise. If there's something you can do, is a great exercise to just jot things down and see where you'd like to make any sort of improvement. And they could be really small things, right? Small things that you can do, which happy to share at another moment. But there are little things. It doesn't have to be a huge investment.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But it's been such a pleasure, Lucero. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. And yeah, I'm sure after folks potentially watch this episode, they will be asking for you to come back. So we should do an encore at some point in time.
Q&A would be interesting if you get like your audience in and then they
Yeah,
fire
we should
away
do that.
questions. I'm happy to answer Q&A.
Yeah.
Rapid fire. And
No, that's a lovely idea.
We've done
do a
Q&As in the past where
Q&A.
we've had our own questions.
Yeah, we should do a 20 questions communication edition.
like
That might be an interesting one.
We could crowdsource some questions for you, even if the audience
We
can't
should.
join real time. Yeah. Let me think of communicating this with the audience in the sense, what is the right question to ask to get the questions that we want for them to ask you, right?
Yeah.
So we'll do that.
And how do you say less and mean more, Raji, while you're doing that?
Exactly. Gosh, I have to think of that also now. Yeah.
Think of that as well.
Short and punchy.
Right.
We'll get there.
Totally. Yeah. But Lucero, thank you so much again for joining. Love this conversation, and that's all we have for this episode. So until next time, fight a good fight, and keep managing in the middle. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.